All right, so welcome to the Canadian Philosophy Show. I'm happy you could join us tonight. My name's Tagen Marshall, and I am here with three esteemed co-hosts, so let them introduce themselves, starting with Nicole.
My name is Nicole Kirigin. I'm a student at Fraser University, and I study philosophy and psychology, and I'm happy to be here.
Hale, why don't you go next?
My name's Hale Rothery. I'm a fourth year philosophy major at Vancouver Island University, and I'm happy to be here as well. Interesting discussion today.
Michael Robert Caditz.
I'm an alumnus at Vancouver, or from Vancouver Island University, and I'm also pretty happy to be here, and looking forward to the topic. Thanks for leading, Tagen.
No problem. I mean, this is a topic that obviously has a lot of bearing on my personal life, so let's get into it. As you know, I'm Tagen Marshall, so there's no need for that introduction, but I'm also a VIU student. So tonight's topic is a fun one and totally non-controversial. Today we will be talking about disabilities. More specifically, we will be talking about not only disability, but the role of philosophy in terms of advocating and helping people with disabilities understand themselves and how that can help them reach their fullest potential. I know for me as a person with a disability, both physical, cerebral palsy, and mental, it always is a challenge to create an identity and to find yourself. And my study of philosophy has really helped me to not only understand some of my history, but advocating and helping people with disabilities attain my fullest abilities. So tonight we will be talking about that. We'll be talking about the nature of advocacy, and we'll spend a little bit of time talking about critical disability theory, and I will be providing, along with my colleagues, a critique of critical disability theory. So before we jump into it, let me ask my co-hosts this question. Do you think, or how do you think philosophy and advocacy go together?
Let me answer first. I think simply that philosophy provides the reasoning towards why somebody should advocate towards something.
You want to expand on that, Nicole?
So I don't think there's a reason to advocate for something if you don't know why you're advocating for something. You can know something intuitively that it's right to advocate for something. For example, if you feel like you're being injustice, you might take that opportunity upon yourself to advocate in order to remove that injustice without really thinking about the logical process behind it. So I guess there is a way to advocate without using philosophy, but at the same time, I think it's important to use philosophy in order to evaluate advocacy opportunities and like when somebody should advocate and when somebody should not advocate for something, because it will allow an ethical analysis to see if like what you're doing is actually right or wrong, and that also depends on what your ethical framework is. But also more importantly, is what you're going to do actually going to be effective, or are you going to actually create more harm in the long run for the purpose that you're advocating for? Correct.
Cool. Hale, why don't you jump in there if you have anything to add?
I think I would, in some sense, I would just pair it what Nicole says, which is like, what would be the purpose of philosophy and advocacy? Well, to advocate, you have to be advocating something, right? And whether the advocacies are ongoing or one wants to start a new advocacy, there needs to be some understanding of the concepts at hand. And And so sometimes those are like, a lot of those times those are already pre-given, or we have some sort of like initial understanding. But, you know, when things get tougher going or more complex, questions start to arise as to essentially like, what are we doing and why are we doing this?
Right.
And so we seek analyzations and justifications for the process of advocacy. And I mean, and I think that simple answer is the kind of general response to like why philosophize about anything. but it's particularly obvious here.
Yeah. What about you, Mikey? And then I'll give my answer.
I don't think that philosophy is something just to be, done in one's head and not interact with the world. I think if we, if hopefully with philosophy we perfect our abilities to think critically and to analyze situations and to think rationally, and if we can do all that and we then find ways to promote what we believe to be true and what we believe to be beneficial to the world, I think we're almost obligated as philosophers to contribute to the world and not just make it a theoretical thing, but apply our philosophy and apply our skills and contribute to the world. I think we have a moral obligation, I would say, to contribute our skills and give back to the world some of what we got in our education.
Right. I mean, I agree with all these answers. As I was reflecting on this question, my answer would be the following. Philosophy, by its very nature, is a form of advocating. You are advocating for a position or an idea. You are analyzing concepts and theories, and as Mikey said, applying them to your own person. So I would argue it's actually impossible to fully advocate unless philosophy is at least somewhat engaged. And because of that reasoning ability, of course, but also because the way philosophical discussion has always been done is within a dialogue or the dialectic. To take the opposing side's viewpoint and to understand it and say, well, I understand, but also to question and analyze, well, where are the flaws in this position? And when we do get to critical disability theory, that's exactly what I will attempt to do in my critique. So, before we get there, let me just jump in and tell you what my disabilities are. I have told you what they are just now, but let me dive into a little more detail onto how that affects my day-to-day life, and then how philosophy has fit in and worked within my worldview to bring me to this discussion today. So, I was born with cerebral palsy, which actually itself is an umbrella term, but basically how that manifests in me, because it's quite severe. I'm also designated as a spastic quadriplegic, which means it affects all my limbs, and I'm spastic, so I'm tense all the time. Which also makes my conversations really intense, or at least that's what I like to blame it on. And so I use a wheelchair daily, and I rely on my family and other caregivers I have within my life to make sure that my needs are met and stuff like that. But as you can tell, I have no problems in the speaking department most of the time, unless I'm just talking too fast. So, that's been quite a gift. But as you can imagine, being in a chair, using that, and living in the world we do has presented some challenges, but it also presents some very unique opportunities. Nicole and I have discussed this topic before as I've shared my story with her and stuff. And I felt like it was time to have that discussion of how does philosophy fit into this? And this is actually a response to one of my professors who wants me to write a paper on this topic. So maybe I'll use this as some groundwork. So as I just stated, I use a wheelchair on a daily basis. And as you can imagine, going back and forth to campus when that was happening prior to COVID is a unique challenge, because any of you who don't know Vancouver Island University, it's built on a hill.
Mm-hmm.
Which
and that ramp story you told me. Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, the ramps are pretty great, especially when they're as tight as ours, and there's people coming down while you're going up. You got to decide at that moment what you're gonna do. Do I back down the ramp, or are they gonna jump the rail? You never quite know. But so you might be asking me, Tagen, you've told us about your disability, but where the heck's the philosophy? That's what we came here for. Well, let me tell you. Being disabled, and I'm not ashamed of that word, being disabled presents unique human relationship struggles, miscommunications, but also great opportunities to invest into those relationships. And people can be very, very open and very comfortable with me because they understand. Well, they see that I have a unique perspective, which makes me, in some senses, more approachable, which I wouldn't trade for the world, honestly. But within these interactions, there is sometimes a misconception that because I'm physically disabled, my intelligence must be questioned. And it's I want to say that it is very, very subconscious. Like, I don't think any of these people do it deliberately. But more often than not, especially within the older generation, you'll see people, when they see me and say hi to me, they'll either slow their speech, so it's like, oh, hello there, how's it going? That's really awkward when you're just not that way. Or they'll get really loud. You can imagine what that'd be like. Or they talk to you in baby talk. Well, that's always awkward when you talk back to them and they may be a little surprised at your response to them.
How often does that happen to you, Tagen?
Well, not super often, but it's happened throughout the years, right? I can't tell you how often it happens. Not often, but sometimes when I go to like a big like community event, it'll happen. Or one story I had was I was interacting with a fellow. I was at Chapters, sipping a coffee, doing what you do. And this older fellow came up to me. We started chatting. Obviously, I'm omitting his details just in case, But he found out that I enjoy to do writing in my spare time, and stuff like that. And he said, well, you must have a lot of free time. You must have a lot of free time on your hands. And one of my family members was there to pick me up, and she picked up on this tendency to tendency that some people have to lower their expectations of me because of my disability, I don't even notice. But they jumped in and rightly said, well, no, he doesn't. And the person was like, well, what do you mean? And I then said, you know, I'm a full-time university student. I'm a philosophy major. If you could have seen his facial reaction at that moment, it was it was funny in a really interesting way. So, you know, you have interactions like that where you just kind of have to smile and nod because it's like, well, that's not accurate. But so, anyway, so fast forwarding, we're gonna get to the philosophy part. I promise. We're not the counseling program. We're the philosophy program. So let's go. So philosophy. Fast forward to my first year of university. First year of university, for anyone who's, well, we've all been first years. We all know the anxiety of first year, coming possibly fresh out of high school, possibly, like I was, fresh meat. The anxiety is real as you try to navigate campus life and where you fit into that. The first philosophy course I ever took was a knowledge and reality course. Man, does that rock your world or what? Talking about going from Plato's Republic to the Communist Manifesto in one class, and seeing how those how the Platonic theories are implemented. And I think for me, one of the biggest things I took away from that class was really the concept of getting what Plato calls getting your house in order, making sure that your reason, your spirit, and your desire were working in harmony to make you an upstanding citizen that can then pursue the good of the community and the society at large. That was formative because it allowed me to start to analyze where my head was at. Because it is very easy to, it's very easy to not be that way. It's very easy to be disorganized and let emotions take hold and stuff like that. And so I was able to apply those and go back to them often. But so there's that discussion. And as many of you know, I live for phenomenology in particular. And so even though it's like the quintessential, like most cheesy philosophy course you can take, it did allow me to realize that I am more than what my disability is. And this is basically what I want the discussion to center on when we talk about critical disability theory. My mission has always been, when talking to people who interact with persons with disabilities, I have done that in the past, to a group of community support workers and future EAs at my university, to say to them, and if I ever have the opportunity to say to fellow people who have disabilities, whether that's psychological or physical, do not let the disability define who you are, but also do not try and erase it from existence. Because there is this push within society that oh well, actually we'll get to examples of that in a moment, but where we try to even the playing field by saying, oh well, we're all very similar. we try to play down the differences. My critique of that is, but that's not helping anyone.
So, can I, just for clarification, would you say that people try to play down the differences between, I guess, and I'm just going to use this terminology just for the sake of argument, but between neurotypical people and neurodiverse people, or neurotypical people saying that oh, we're all the same, or what is the thing there?
Well, okay, I wanted to save this example for
and we can talk about this terminology too later on as well.
Yeah, I mean, one terminology which will be my primary focus is the term diversibility.
Mm-hmm.
I hate to break it to people, and I said this to the class of community support workers at the time, that ain't helping anyone. It doesn't help anyone. Because to say that we're all the same, that we all have unique abilities, that's true. But to downplay the struggle that some people with disabilities struggle with on a day-to-day basis is wrong. To say that the things we experience in terms of just getting around, in terms of our communities and universities, stuff like that, and they don't do this intentionally, I might add, but by the very nature, how does taking away someone's struggle and saying, oh, well, you're just the same as everybody else, how does that actually empower them to rise to the occasion?
Can I ask a question just for more clarification? So, would you say that the Diversibility movement says, oh, because we are all different, that makes us all the same, and all our struggles are the same and equal to each other? Can you clarify that?
Sure. I haven't done a lot of research into that movement. In fact, I've done very little. But my understanding is basically it's the old statement that our diversity is our strength. And it's well, no, actually, my disability, pushes me to do better. My disability pushes me to look at things in a different way. And if we are to say, well, we're all diverse, but my thing is, that is only sugarcoating the issue. And this is where philosophy comes in. Philosophy is meant, by its very issue, not to just settle ethical or moral disputes.
Can I summarize that, what you're saying?
Sure.
Just for the viewers. So would the Diversibility movement, the problem with that movement, you would say, is that it's an oversimplification of the complexity of diversity but disability in particular, and what it says in its central message is that we are all different, our strength is that we're all different, but by saying that is sugarcoats the issue, and then at side tables space for other discussions to be happening.
I think I'll take the heat for this. I think it's a toxic movement because it does not allow individuals to recognize their value outside of their disability. Because go ahead, Hale.
Oh no, you finish what you were gonna say, but I was gonna just tack on to.
Okay, sure.
You finish.
It does not allow the individual to realize who they are, as it pertains to. It does not allow the individual to see themselves as anything but the disability. So the very movement that is trying to say that the disability doesn't matter. That's a lie to say the disability doesn't matter. What I think we should be saying, though, is your disability matters because it actually empowers you to look at things differently. It empowers you to interact differently, but also use that to motivate you to experience and to find your fundamental purpose and meaning, because you have value. You have value because you're you, not because of your disability. Go ahead, Hale.
Yeah, I was going to say a lot of very personal and powerful stuff, Tagen. I know that you're into phenomenology, and as you were speaking there about the movement, the title of which I've already forgotten, their stance on that everybody is essentially same, or it has value, or trying to obfuscate disability. It reminds me of the phenomenological term of leveling down, in which societies or communities oversimplify differences between objects or people or perceptions, and in a sense try to simplify them so that they're easily digestible to a current social or political milieu. And in that way, both the issues at hand and, in this case, the individuals, like you're saying, end up becoming de-individuated. Right? So, in this case, it's meant to be a positive statement about people in general, including people with disabilities. But what I think I hear from you is that what it actually does is strip individual people of powerful elements of themselves that individuate them as persons.
Right. I appreciate that, Hale. That is basically what I'm getting at. Is I don't, and pretty soon we will move to the critical disability theory, because time is ticking down, and I hate when that happens, because I feel like I spend too much time on the personal aspect and not enough on the philosophical. But basically, let me summarize my point before I move to critical race theory, which is the empowerment of the individual requires the individual to have the ability to discover their true potential. And I will use, and why is philosophy the way that can primarily be achieved? It's because philosophy, by its very nature, is not just a debating tactic, but it is a method and a series of concepts which help individuals discover not only who they are, but what they can accomplish. In fact, Plato, or Socrates rather, but Plato wrote Socrates' dialogue. So, but in Plato's work, we see that Socrates refers to philosophy as having the ability to free the mind. Right? Because ultimately, what is philosophy in terms of advocating? It's the pursuit of truth. We advocate and we pursue the truth. Whether that be objective truth or subjective truth, that's another debate. But we strive to perceive the truth. And in understanding philosophy, our mind is then freed to discover more about ourselves and more about our individuality and more of our true potential. Does that make sense?
Before you go on, can I ask a quick question about your stance, Tagen? So,
please.
And it's kind of a two-part question. So, if labeling people like via the diversibility movement leads to de-individuation, and that is like what we're arguing, or what Tagen, at least what you're arguing, is a negative outcome, should we rid of all labels? And firstly, rid of all labels, number one, to describe people and human beings, and two, everything in the world. And that's a different, they're both different extents of the argument, but I think they both apply to this. And I think that also touches on phenomenology as well.
I mean, I appreciate that, Nikki, but I think I have failed in my analysis of my my stating of my position. My position is not to get rid of labels, because I am disabled. I accept that label. I may not like that label, but that's besides the point. The label is there. What I'm trying to move people to do is to see that label as not all they are.
Yeah.
I'm
Threshold. Where's the line between labeling where it's like okay and then labeling where it becomes like a pathology?
If I could just say something, just real quick, Tagen, before you speak there, it's just you say as the label is not all that they are, but also that the label is not nothing either, which is, I think, what the diverse Nicole, what is it called again?
Diversibility.
The diversibility movement is kind of, that's the direction that I get the sense the diversibility movement is going, where it's saying like that label is that label is what's what I'm looking for.
Not
it's
relevant.
Like passe now, it's not needed. We can get rid of it. It's finding that middle ground, I think, Tagen. I believe what you're getting at.
Yeah,
you don't want to you basically don't want to have it where you get tunnel vision on that label and then you can't see anything else. That's the idea.
Precisely.
Okay.
Yeah, precisely. And I apologize to our listeners who haven't heard the rest of my co-host for the last 10 minutes because I talk too much. But obviously,
No.
I carry a heavy burden with this topic, so I guess we're just gonna have to live with that, I suppose. But yeah, I think Hale, you got it right, and I think Nikki, you got it right. That my point is the label's impact on your life in terms of the choices you make can be lessened, but the label itself will forever remain. And I'm trying to create within myself, or what I would like to see as it pertains to, other people, to see that label, although it is part of you, it definitely is part of you, obviously it's part of you, doesn't need to be the label that dictates your entire future and your entire life. And I know sometimes, it can feel that way. But when you realize, like I did, that having a disability allows me to speak to a unique perspective, allows me to even look at my discipline in a unique manner. Because when we talk in existentialism about being forlorn, alone, in despair, right, that in terms of having a disability can be very real at moments. Because as much as I can explain to other people what I experience, they can't necessarily experience that. But it is in the power of realizing that the opportunity, basically that, as Hale said, that label doesn't need to define you, but that label is still important because it speaks to an aspect of your world, an aspect of how you understand, relate, and perceive your very mission in life. All right. Well, that was a real. Any last comments before we jump into?
I have maybe this is more of a question I was thinking about, Tagen, and I feel like I maybe already kind of know the answer, but it leads into our discussion of critical disability theory, which is, as a person, as you've already stated, and you believe you are a person with a disability or disabilities. Do you see, not just disability, the concept, but your personal disability or aspect as something that's intrinsic to who you are, particularly as a physical being? I mean, there's all sorts of stuff we can go off on here, but we'll keep it as simple as possible. Or do you see that disability as being more rooted in cultural, historical, relative, and social phenomena. I think that kind of leads into our discussion.
Oh yeah,
of
no,
critical theory.
it definitely does. It definitely does. And the disability is a physical thing. The disability is part of who I am. This isn't just a societal cultural workup. If it was, then I wouldn't feel the pain that I experience when I stretch. If it was, I wouldn't need the physical assistance. So the idea that disability is just this concept, although there is some validity to the idea of social impact, both in a positive and in a negative way. I think diversibility is kind of one of those issues where society has latched onto it and really taken disability and flicked it to an alternate negative. And I think, this moves right in. So to answer your question, Hale, succinctly, it's a real thing. It is a bodily thing. It's intrinsic to my very existence. And by that virtue, I can't say that it's the other position where it is strictly historical, societal, and cultural, because that's not an accurate reflection to the mental disabilities I have of the challenges I have there and cerebral palsy. So would be nice sometimes if it was, but it's not. So anyways, does that answer your question?
Yeah, and I think
that was a really convoluted way to answer your question, because I can't talk.
It was interesting you suggested this reading and getting into critical theory, and I'll admit that my exposure to critical theories in general is quite limited. I have more exposure to some of the thinkers that sort of presuppose critical theory and that critical theory is built upon. But I found reading the reading that you suggested, Tagen, both annoying, but also quite enlightening, and in a sense, annoyingly, I found myself thinking a lot of the time that a lot of it actually made quite a bit of sense. So it was. I'm interested to hear what your thoughts on that. I think the one thing I want to say though is that, like with anything, my belief is that we have a tendency, especially in philosophy, I think, to want to get to definitive concepts of beings or entities in general. Those entities be beings or are aspects of beings or whatever, and that in fact, I think critical theory speaks to the fact that most things, it's less of what they are, but how they present themselves in a given context, which I thought was very interesting, and at least from parts of the reading I found seemed to make a lot of sense in regards to someone with disabilities, however that might be, that the meaning of one's own disability would be heavily influenced by the world that they inhabit and how that world and the power structures around them relate and influence them or block them or enhance them in some sense.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah, and if I were to expand on what Hale said, I actually have a quote from the reading here. It's also based on another continental approach to.
Nikki, can I pause you for 1 second?
Yeah.
And just say before we jump into that. So now we're moving into critical disability theory. Hey Nicole, before you jump onto your point, because I'm sure it's an excellent point, do you want to just briefly? You had a quotation on what critical disability theory suggests it is or claims to be. Can you read that out for us?
The quote was more in response to Hale's point, but in regard to it making sense, but it's also to validate, Tagen, your perspective here. So I'm going to read the quote here. So it's phenomenology, including questions of ontology, human heuristics, and life writing, is one critical approach taken within disability studies. For example, some philosophers argue that framing disability as a problem generates a restrictive discourse, specifically the requirement for explanation and amelioration, but little else. So that's mirroring, I think, Tagen closely to your perspective there. So there are some people who do kind of have that perspective there.
Right. Nikki, while you're on the mic, can you define for us in the article, it does say what critical disability theory attempts to do in terms of just the introduction. Can you read that for us, please? This is from... Okay, while you find that, for our viewers, this is from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy entry on critical disability theory. If you're interested, I will put a link up on our Facebook page, the Canadian Philosophy Show on Facebook, for you to look that up and do some research for yourself. And please send us a message if we don't get your question tonight. If you have any questions or comments, we'd be happy to oblige you in that way.
Yeah, thanks, Tagen. So I'm going to read actually a paragraph from the conclusion here, and I think it's the best summary of this article. So it says that critical disability theory is a diverse set of approaches that largely seek to theorize disability as a cultural, political, and social phenomenon, rather than an individualized medical manner attached to the body. In this way, it shares goals with traditional disability studies. But additionally, critical disability theory actively seeks alliances and has produced work in conversation with other key areas of critical thought: critical race theory, post-colonial theory, queer theory, and continental philosophy, among other strategies. It also reflexively considers exclusions, framing, and normative presuppositions of disability studies, favoring intersectional approaches and expansive inclusion. Critical disability theory presumes that those persons whom the label disability attaches share in overlapping and intensifying oppressions with pathologized and devalued persons in circumstances not readily recognized as disabled. So that's a good way of summarizing the article. And again, if you guys want to look at this article, it's the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, Critical Disability Theory entry, and we'll also post it on our Facebook page on the Canadian Philosophy Show's Facebook.
Yeah, thanks, Nikki. So I want to do a roundtable discussion on this real quick. From that description, what do you take from that description? And we'll start with Mikey, because we haven't heard from Mikey in a minute.
Well, I was just reading a paragraph in another description here from Purdue University, and it says it's important to understand disability as part of one's identity, much like race, class, gender, sexuality, and nationality. And I think that's the point that you're making, I believe, Tagen, is that tell me if I'm understanding you right, Tagen. I think you have a theory here. You have an approach that you're taking. You have a stand, and tell me if I'm getting it right. So I'm going to answer your question with another question. That's my contribution here.
That's okay. What philosophers do, Mikey, so let's go.
So are you saying that you are opposed on one extreme to, let's say, discrimination against or stigmatization of disabled people, but on the other extreme you're also opposed to pretending that disabled people aren't disabled? In other words, like ignoring that fact. So I think what you're saying is that the approach you take is somewhere in the middle, which is that it's important to recognize one's self-identity as disabled because that is part of your actual life, and you can't just dismiss an identity of being disabled and the realities that you face because of it. You can't dismiss that as social construction. So it's real, and it's important for you to, as a disabled person, to acknowledge and accept that you're disabled, rather than to say we should be colorblind and ability blind and everyone should be the same. Is that your point? Am I articulating that at all accurately?
Exactly. I'm saying that even though there should be, even though disabled people, people with disabilities, um, should be given as many of the same opportunities as possible. I'm also saying for our society to try to change the language to say that, oh well, we're all the same. Yeah, it's exactly what you're saying, Mikey. I'm saying that empowerment is necessary and recognition is necessary, while also saying that we can't. Yeah, forget what I'm saying. You're correct, Mikey. You have my point fairly accurate there.
Okay, so let me just respond. I'm going to give you a little bit of food for argument here. So here's a response to that from a philosophical point of view, and you might be getting into this in a minute, but I'll keep it brief. But in order to be considered disabled, there has to be a standard that which you don't meet or which you deviate from. So there must be some normal. So I suppose you could make a biological argument that there's a such thing as a completely abled human body, but I'm not sure about that. Here it says, many literary critics in disability studies examine the ways novels and other public spaces reinforce concepts about normal, quote unquote, individuals. Right. For instance, Leonard Davis writes about the historical context of the term normal, noting that the words modern use came into being with the rise of statistics and eugenics in the 19th century. So here's my challenge to your position, Tagen. If you're advocating that people who are disabled take full, I shouldn't say responsibility, but fully accept that identity and even be proud of that identity and not try and deny it, is there really a such thing as disabled if it weren't for social constructed normal? Because to be disabled or to be disadvantaged or to be differently abled or to be in some way different than the norm requires a definition of the norm. So is the norm a valid standard by which one should measure him or herself? Or is the norm, is the average man merely a social construction?
I mean, it's obviously a social construction but I think we all would say that we have a fairly uniform idea of what normal looks like. And so...
Yeah, but Tagen, let me just interject here. Many white people believed and still believe that a black person is biologically inferior. That normal is to be white and to be black is biologically inferior. Hitler claimed that Jews and homosexuals and gypsies were biologically inferior. So aren't we walking down a dangerous path if we were to say that you or anyone else who has certain physical properties, which might be different than mine, that you are inferior or disabled? So I'm challenging your objection to those that want to do away with the term disabled. That's all.
Well, that's all. You've just brought in. You've literally brought in white supremacy, Nazi ideology, eugenics. All right, that's all. No. What I would say though is, there is a minority, and it would be wrong to deny that the majority of people do not have these physical or mental limitations as much. So to say, we're not saying that disabled people are inferior. In fact, that's what I'm trying to make disabled people realize. But I'm also saying that that's not up to society to determine or try to promote.
Yeah, but society defines what's disabled, and why should it be the majority? I mean, couldn't you have the majority of people disabled? What if I said the majority of Canadians or the majority of North Americans were disabled because they have trouble feeling their feelings, and they have high levels of anxiety because they overwork themselves, or they have high levels of stress because of the demands placed on them by societal roles. Therefore, all those people, 80% of Canadians are disabled. So my point is that it's a social construct that a physical condition, a biological condition such as cerebral palsy is considered disabled, but being living a high stress life and eating a bunch of junk food, that's considered normal. That's an interpretation. It's a subjective interpretation. So I'm arguing that it is a societal construct.
I'm
I'm trying to think about how to word this, because this is something that, again, my exposure to critical theory is limited, but I think that one thing I've noted, and I think the division comes in, is that when we're talking about wide concepts like disability in general, critical theory becomes quite a useful task determining, like, how as a society do we function and set up our systems of power or oppression, then affect how generally people with disabilities experience themselves. But at the same hand, this goes for any sort of characteristic that any individual has, we are thrown into our particular individual situations, and trying to skirt them off as being a societal construct is not actually all that helpful, although they may very well be at their most bottom ontological or whatever foundation you want to call it. It's not particularly helpful or useful or determinative of oneself to look at them or experience them that way, because that's not actually how one experiences them personally.
Yeah. So let's separate out the objective experience from the societal construct around it. So you could say, Tagen, that you experience, and you could make a list of the physical issues that you have and the hardships that you have, or the pain or the difficulties you have. Those are just objective facts. But as soon as you label it disability, and this is where I'm challenging you, Tagen, and I hope you don't mind as a philosopher, so because you want to,
I don't mind.
You want to proudly proclaim that you're disabled, but what I'm claiming is that to say you're disabled can only be so relative to some norm, because disabled it's only disabled relative to what enabled would be. And so what I'm suggesting is that enabled or not disabled is an arbitrary societal construct based on what the average man is, and it's relative.
Yeah, but Mikey, here's the deal. And here's why I struggle with diversibility. So you're saying that my struggle is my struggle, and then everyone else has those struggles. Because
everybody has different kinds of struggles. Yeah.
I know, but can we agree that needing physical help to get out of bed in the morning is significantly different than having a dietary issue?
Sure, yeah, so this is where going back to sort of what I was saying earlier, like, again, on the one hand, I think that the critical theory approach to the generalized condition experience, not in some individual but across the board and whatever groups you're talking about, perhaps gives true interpretations, but it's not particularly helpful in terms of articulating what one's experience is, and bridging that gap is a challenge.
And I mean, I'm not acknowledging. I mean, I'm not rejecting the claim that we all have struggles, but I'm saying that my struggles comparative to the general public are vastly different. And who is the general public to then say, well, you know what, we're all the same? Because they don't know what it's like. And I mean, you could say that back to me.
What about like, yeah,
Go
but like,
ahead.
what about saying that like we all have like different levels? Like not all, but like the people, whoever like has disability has different levels of it, how it impacts their life. Like why can't like we just like evaluate it based on how it impacts somebody's life instead of trying to throw other labels on it?
Nicole,
Like let's say that I have like anxiety or something, right?
Right.
Like if anxiety ends up debilitating me to the point where I can't function, that becomes a disability.
Correct.
However, let's say that somebody has Parkinson's disease,
Right.
but they control it to the point where they are very functional.
Right.
And at the same time, like people usually consider like Parkinson's a worse like disease than, let's say, like anxiety. Like why can't people just evaluate it based on how it impacts somebody's life instead of trying to play like I guess a game based on like what is like the most severe and trying to evaluate it that way? I hope that makes sense.
Like, no, it does, but we're out of time. So you know what? I'm gonna propose on air right now that we come back to these questions in a future program, because I'm gonna need some time to do some research and some analysis to better answer these questions and these objections. These are good objections. And I thank Mikey and Nicole and Hale for their contributions. So thank you for listening to the Canadian Philosophy Show. I'm Tagen Marshall, and I'll let Nikki, Hale, and Mikey say goodbye to you, and we'll talk to you next week. Go, Nikki.
So, or hi or bye or whatever. I'm saying bye to you guys. It's kind of like a throwback to the Mark episode. De-introducing ourselves. Let's de-introduce ourselves here. But I'm a philosophy and psychology student at Simon Fraser University, and I'm happy to be here. Thanks for including me on this topic.
Hale, any last words of wisdom?
I'm just a philosophy major at VIU. It was an interesting discussion. I think that there's to, and I definitely would look forward to a part 2.
Excellent.
So that's all I have to say for now.
Mikey.
Yeah, I'm Michael Caditz. I'm de-introducing myself, so now I'm fading back into the woodwork until next week.
All right, and I'm Tagen Marshall. This has been the Canadian Philosophy Show, and we'll see you next week.